I spent years saying yes when I meant no, overextending myself, taking on things I didn't have the capacity for, resenting people for crossing boundaries I never even communicated. And I thought I was being kind. I thought I was being a good friend, a good person, someone people could count on. But I learned that's not kindness. That's self-abandonment. When you're constantly saying yes when you mean no, you're not honoring the relationship. You're betraying yourself. And that resentment you feel, it leaks out in passive aggression and withdrawal and the way you show up half present because you're depleted. Real kindness requires honesty. It requires boundaries. Welcome back to A Lot to Grow Through. I'm Artist. This is where we grow through it, not just go through it. And today we're talking about boundaries, what they actually are, why they feel impossible to set, and what it costs you when you don't. Because truth is, most of us weren't taught that boundaries are okay. We were taught that our needs come second. That saying no is selfish. That because accommodating is the same as being loved. And so we spend years, sometimes decades, overextending, overgrowing, overdoing until we're burnt out, resentful and wondering why our relationships don't feel good even though we're doing everything right. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're not about being difficult or unkind. They're about protecting what allows you to stay in. Stay present, stay authentic, stay sustainable in your relationships. And learning to set them, it's one of the most important skills you can develop. So let's get into it. Let's start with clarity, because I think boundaries has become a buzzword that means everything and nothing. A boundary is a limit you set to protect your well-being, energy, time, or values. That's it. It's not complicated conceptually because it's complicated emotionally. Boundaries are about you, what you will and won't accept, what you need, what works for you. They're not about controlling other people. They're about defining your own limits. Here's some examples of boundaries, including some of my actual boundaries. Boundaries. I can talk for 20 minutes, then I need to go. I make myself unavailable in the mornings and after a certain time at night. Emotional boundaries. I'm not available to process your relationship drama right now. Communication boundaries. I don't engage in gossip. Physical boundaries. I don't like being hugged without asking. Material boundaries. I don't lend money to family. Availability boundaries. If you need my attention and I don't have a lot of time, I'll set a hard time limit up front. And here's the key to understand. Boundaries are about what you will do, not what you demand others to do. This is critical. Let me say it again differently. Boundary. I won't engage in conversations where I'm being yelled at. If you raise your voice, I'll leave the room. Not a boundary. More of a demand. You need to stop yelling at me. See the difference? One is about your behavior, what you will or won't accept, what you'll do in response. The other is trying to control their behavior. I have a saying that you can't control other people's emotions or reactions. You will drive yourself crazy trying, but you can control your own responses and limits. That's what a boundary is. It's drawing a line about what you're available for and what you'll do when the line gets crossed. I know some of you are already feeling uncomfortable. The idea of setting limits, of saying this is what I need, it might feel selfish or wrong. We're going to talk about that. But first, let's make sure we understand what boundaries are and what they aren't. Let's distinguish boundaries from two things they're often confused with: walls and demands. Because if you don't understand the difference, you'll either become rigid and disconnected or you'll exhaust yourself trying to control people. Boundaries. Flexible, context-dependent limits that allow connection while protecting well-being. They create safety for connection. Walls. Rigid barriers that prevent all connection and vulnerability. They protect you from connection. Demands. Attempts to control other people's behavior. They're about changing them, not protecting you. Let me give you some examples. Boundary. I need advance notice for plans. If you ask me last minute, I'll probably say no. Wall. I don't make plans with people ever. Demand. You need to give me notice. You're so inconsiderate when you don't. Another example. Boundary. I need us to speak respectfully. If the conversation becomes hostile, I'll take a break and we can revisit later. Wall. I won't talk about anything difficult with you. Demand. You need to calm down and be respectful. You see the pattern? Boundaries say, I'm open to connection, but here are the conditions that honor both of us. Walls say, I'm not available for connection at all. Demands say, you need to change so I can be comfortable. Boundaries create safety for connection. They're not about shutting people out. They're about creating conditions where you can actually show up. Walls prevent connection entirely. They might feel safe, but they also isolate you. Demands try to control the other person, and you can't control other people. You just can't. You'll exhaust yourself trying. The goal is boundaries, not walls, not demands. Now, I want to acknowledge something. If you've been hurt a lot, if you experience significant betrayal or abuse, walls might be what you need right now, and that's okay. Walls serve a purpose when you're healing. They create space. Long term, what you're working toward is boundaries, flexible limits that allow for connection while protecting your well-being. Let me tell you about when I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I was coasting through life instead of fully living it, just going through the motions. And a big part of that was because I was constantly saying yes to things I didn't want to do. People would ask me for something, my time, my energy, my help, and before I even processed whether I actually wanted to do it, I'd hear myself say yes. And then I'd be stuck, committed to something I didn't have capacity for, something I didn't actually want to do. But here's what made it click for me. I would get upset after saying yes, not at the person who asked, at myself, because I knew, even as the word yes was coming out of my mouth, that I didn't want to do it, that I didn't have the bandwidth, that I was overextending. And saying yes when I was meaning no was costing me more than I could afford to give of myself. It was costing me my energy, my peace, my presence in my own life. I was giving from an empty cup and then resisting people for taking what I offered. That's when I realized this isn't sustainable. This isn't kind. This isn't even honest. If I keep saying yes when I mean no, I'm lying to them and to myself. And that was the breaking point. The moment I understood that boundaries aren't selfish, they're essential. Because you can't show up well for people when you're depleted. You can't be present when you're resentful. You can't have healthy relationships when you're constantly betraying yourself. So if you're someone who says yes when you mean no, who overextends and then feels resentful, I need you to know this isn't a character flaw. It's a learned pattern. And you can change it. It won't be comfortable at first. It's going to feel wrong, but it's necessary. Here's the big emotional hurdle with boundaries. They feel selfish, especially if you grew up in an environment where your needs didn't matter or were actively dismissed. You were responsible for managing other people's emotions. Love felt conditional on being accommodating, helpful, easy. Saying no led to punishment, guilt tripping, or abandonment. You internalize the message. My needs are less important than others. Setting limits makes me a bad person. And now, as an adult, the thought of saying no, of disappointing someone, of prioritizing yourself, it feels wrong, selfish, mean. Let me tell you about the first time I really set a boundary that felt selfish. I started speaking how I felt instead of holding it in, letting people know immediately when something bothered me instead of swallowing it and building resentment. And I'm not even sure why I felt selfish. Maybe because I've been trained my whole life to prioritize other people's comfort over my own honesty. But I set the boundary anyway. I spoke up. I said how I felt. And you know what happened? I felt so good putting myself first. Not in an arrogant way, but in an I matter too way. It was like this weight lifted because for the first time, I wasn't carrying something that didn't belong to me. I wasn't protecting someone else's feelings at the expense of my own. Now, I won't lie, there was guilt. There was that voice in my head saying, "You're being difficult. You're too much. You should just let it go." But I worked through it with self-talk. I reminded myself, honesty isn't cruelty. Setting a boundary isn't punishment. I'm allowed to have needs. And the more I practiced, the easier it got. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential. You can't sustain relationships when you're constantly overextending. You'll burn out. You'll resent people. You'll give, but resentfully. And that's not healthy for anyone. Boundaries allow you to show up authentically and sustainably. When you have boundaries, you can say yes when you mean yes. You can give generously because you're not depleted. You can be present because you're not overwhelmed. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about protecting what allows you to stay in. Stay present, stay authentic, stay sustainable in relationships. I know the guilt might still be there for you, that voice that says you're being selfish, but I need you to ask yourself, who taught you that your needs don't matter? And do you want to keep living by that rule? Because you're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to have limits. You're allowed to say no. Okay, so you've decided to set a boundary. Now, how do you actually communicate it? You don't need to justify, explain endlessly, or apologize excessively. I know that's hard. I know you want to soften the blow, make sure they understand, prove that you're not being unreasonable, but over-explaining weakens the boundary. Over-explaining. I'm so sorry. I know you want me to, but I just can't right now because I have so much going on and I'm really overwhelmed and I feel terrible saying no, but clear and kind. I can't do that. I'm not available this week. You can be warm and firm at the same time. So here's a simple template. I need, insert boundary, when, insert situation, I will, insert your action. Or, I'm not available for, insert thing, I can offer, insert alternative instead. Here are some examples using my actual boundaries. I make myself unavailable in the mornings and after a certain time at night. If you reach out during those times, I won't respond until I'm available. I don't engage in gossip. If the conversation turns to talking negatively about someone who isn't here, I'm going to redirect or step away. If you need my attention and I don't have time, I'll set a hard time limit up front. When that time is up, I'll need to go. I need us to speak respectfully. If the conversation becomes hostile, I'll take a break and we can revisit when we're both calmer. Be specific. Vague boundaries are harder to honor. And the hardest part, you have to follow through. If you say you'll leave a conversation if someone yells and they yell, leave. If you say you won't discuss a topic and they bring it up, redirect or disengage. If you say you're not available after a certain time at night and they text you, don't respond. Your boundaries are only as strong as your follow through. I learned this the hard way. I can't recall a specific first example of communicating a boundary perfectly, but I know that when I finally got confident in my delivery and cared more about how it made me feel than how they might react, that's when it stuck. When I stopped apologizing, when I stopped over-explaining, when I just stated my boundary clearly and then enforced it, that's when people started respecting them. Now, some of you are thinking, but what if they get upset? They might, and that's okay. Their discomfort with your boundary doesn't mean your boundary is wrong. It means they're adjusting to you taking up space. Give them time, but don't abandon your boundary because they're uncomfortable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Not everyone will respect your boundaries. Some people will push back. Some will guilt trip you. Some will ignore your boundaries entirely. And that tells you something important about the relationship. Healthy people respect boundaries. They might be disappointed. They might need to adjust, but they respect limits. Unhealthy dynamics are built on boundary violations. When you set a boundary, the whole system resists because the relationship was built on your lack of boundaries. So what do you do when someone doesn't respect your boundary? Let me tell you what I did. I had a friend who I cut off. We eventually became friends again, and when we did, I set a clear boundary. As soon as we became friends again, they crossed that boundary immediately. I'm talking that night, as if they were itching to do it, not by accident, intentionally. And I learned when someone crosses a boundary intentionally, they're showing you they don't respect you. They're showing you that their comfort, their wants, their way of operating matters more to them than your well-being. So I spoke my mind instead of avoiding conflict. I told them exactly how I felt. I didn't soften it. I didn't make excuses for them. I was direct. And then I cut them off permanently. Because through that experience, I learned. Set a boundary. If they cross it intentionally, dismiss the individual. If they cross it unintentionally, coach them. There's a difference. Unintentional boundary crossing looks like they didn't know the boundary existed. You hadn't communicated it clearly. They forgot in the moment. They misunderstood what the boundary meant. In these cases, you remind them, you reinforce the boundary, you give them another chance. Intentional boundary crossing looks like they knew the boundary and chose to violate it anyway. They tested you to see if you'd enforce it. They guilt-tripped you for having the boundary in the first place. They repeatedly forgot after multiple reminders. In these cases, you have options. Option 1, reinforce the boundary firmly. I've already said I'm not available for that. I need you to respect that. Option 2, create distance if someone repeatedly violates your boundaries. You might need to limit your time or end contact. And this is hard, especially with family, but your well-being matters. Option 3, accept that the relationship might change or end. Some relationships can't survive boundaries, and that's painful, but it also means the relationship was built on your lack of boundaries, and that's not sustainable anyway. For me, that friendship ended, and it needed to, because I learned something crucial. I don't allow people in my life who don't respect my boundaries. That's a non-negotiable now. And here's what's changed in my life since I started setting and enforcing boundaries. My relationships have blossomed. The people who respect my boundaries were closer than ever, because the relationship is built on honesty, not accommodation. Boundaries have also assisted me in the creation of new relationships, because I'm clear from the beginning about what I need, what I'm available for, what works for me. And you know what? Everything is better. Nothing is hard about it anymore. The hard part was learning to set them. The hard part was working through the guilt. The hard part was accepting that some people won't adjust. But now, it's just how I operate. It's just who I am. Setting boundaries doesn't make you difficult. It makes you honest. And the people who truly value you will adjust. The people who don't, they were never meant to stay. I know this might sting if you're thinking about specific people in your life right now, people who won't respect your boundaries, but you have to decide, is this relationship worth sacrificing your well-being for? Because that's what you're doing when you let people violate your boundaries repeatedly. You're choosing their comfort over your peace, and you deserve peace. So let's bring this home. Boundaries aren't walls. They're not about keeping people out. They're not about being difficult or unkind. They're about protecting what allows you to stay in, stay present, stay authentic, stay sustainable in relationships. They feel hard because most of us weren't taught that our needs matter, that we're allowed to have limits, that saying no is an option. We were taught to accommodate, to be easy, to prioritize other people's comfort over our own honesty. But you are allowed to have boundaries. Your needs do matter, and setting limits doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest. It makes you sustainable in your relationships. It allows you to show up authentically instead of resentfully. And yeah, some people won't like it. Some people will push back. Some relationships might not survive. But the relationships that do survive, the ones built on mutual respect and honesty, those are the ones worth having. The ones where you don't have to abandon yourself to maintain connection. The ones where you can be fully you and still be loved. That's what boundaries create. That's what they protect. So if you're just starting this work, if you're learning to say no for the first time, if you're working through the guilt, if you're navigating pushback, keep going. It gets easier. It becomes natural. It becomes just who you are. And your life will be better for it. If this episode resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Share your questions, your stories, your reflections. You can submit them in writing form or as a voice message by emailing letters@alottogrowthrough.com. I'll read and listen to every single one. Visit the podcast website at alottogrowthrough.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share. This podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Always remember, healing isn't linear, and you're doing better than you think. I'll see you next week.